Hello and welcome. I have decided to record this video because I recently went to see Spirited Away live on stage, the film recording of the production. I was super excited for this. Spirited Away is probably in my top 5, if not top 3 favorite movies of all time. And I really wanted to talk about it. I love theater and I love Ghibli. They are literally 2 of my favorite things. So after coming out of the theater and talking to my boyfriend about it, I wanted to see what people were saying online. And I believe this was the first day that that screening was available in the US. So there really wasn't much that people were saying just because they hadn't seen it, right? The production had played in Tokyo in 2022. So people had seen it there, and I'm sure there are some Japanese reviews about it, but really nobody in the US that I was able to find was talking about it. So I figured I would just share my thoughts, put them out there, and hopefully some other people will see this video and let me know what they thought. So first off, to provide some background on this stage production, and I will caveat this by saying that I only saw a filmed recording of the stage production. I didn't see the actual play, so obviously with any recording of a live performance, there are some liberties taken with the editing, with the directing, with what to focus on, so I didn't have the most authentic experience. So I'm just speaking based off of the live recording of the stage production. So first off, some background. This recording and the stage production itself was directed by a man named John Caird. He has directed a wide variety of theatrical productions in the past, both in the US, in Europe, I believe, and more recently in Tokyo. So this was put on in Tokyo in 2022. So John Caird had actually met with Miyazaki and the producers at Studio Ghibli to pitch them this idea of adapting Spirited Away the film to the stage. Luckily, he received their blessing, and Miyazaki, for the most part, stayed out of any of the creative process, any of the directing process, any of the casting, all of it. He was not involved with the stage production, basically at all, except for in one way, which I will point out later. That being said, Studio Ghibli themselves actually did lend their artistry to paint the backgrounds that appear in certain parts of the play. So there are some projections that are just projected onto a screen in the beginning during the car sequence, during the train scene, and then again at the end. And that art itself was created by Studio Ghibli, which I think is really cool. And this brings me to the staging and the set design of the show. Now, the big question that I had going in, which I'm sure that many others will as well, is how did they bring this film to the stage, right? It's set in this massive bathhouse, multi-story, in this magical spiritual world. It's set in an abandoned theme park, and our main characters also travel outside of the bathhouse to other areas as well. So I was really curious as to how they were going to contain such a large setting on one stage. For the most part, this was very well done. I will say the beginning was a little bit rocky for me personally. We start off, like I said, with this projection of a painting onto a screen, then the screen goes up and we are introduced to the actual set. It took me a while to get adjusted to the set that they had created. However, once the plot sort of speeds up, things really do start falling into place, and it became much easier for me to wrap my head around the premise of the staging. I'll include a photo of just the bare stage. It's publicly available. It hopefully won't give away any of the spoilers of the setting because it's very much just the bare bones of it. But it's this main building structure in the middle, which is the bathhouse, this pathway that leads up to it, and then on the side we have some ladders and climbing structures. And these are very mobile. They move around throughout the play very frequently, and they represent essentially the different floors of this bathhouse, and they are rearranged depending on which floor you are on. It also is made to look like the town, the abandoned town in the very beginning, and then later on in the play, when we leave the bathhouse, the set is adjusted to reflect those other settings as well. So while it does look a little bit bare bones, I will say they were incredibly creative with this, and the props and the puppetry and the actors and the costumes really bring this set to life. And the way that it moved and they reconfigure it depending on what floor they're on really works in terms of crafting a believable, large building. Another way in which the stage production stays true to the source material is that costume-wise, they essentially don't change a thing, at least not that I noticed. This makes sense. They're easy enough to recreate, they're not very complex, and then also these costumes are very much ingrained in the minds of the audience, so it would have really removed the audience from the play if they had suddenly changed up the costumes in a very dramatic way. Now, on to the puppetry. A major way in which this stage production manages to really bring the film to life is through the use of puppetry. In the film, we have spirits of all shapes and sizes, gods, creatures that there is no real human equivalent to, right? So the only way to go about that was by using puppets. And I have to say, for the most part, they did a really great job. Some real standout puppetry work was No Face. For those of you who've seen the movie know that his body and shape changes quite dramatically throughout the film, so the way that they were able to adapt that to the stage was very creative. And then also, I really liked Kamaji. Kamaji is a creature with, I think, 8 arms, a spider-like creature. And then also there are some pretty prominent characters, side characters, who are very small creatures. So they needed very small, but still lovable and believable puppets to work with. And I think that they did a very good job with that. The puppets, for the most part, are controlled by people who are dressed in neutral background colors to blend in. So the focus is on the puppet. It's obviously impossible for them to completely blend in. They were still noticeable, but it was honestly, I think they did the best they could, and it didn't take me away from the story too much. Now, definitely a standout element of the stage production for me were the performances. Ghibli is known for their incredibly realistic, lovable, and really three-dimensional characters. I am very much emotionally attached to the film version of these characters. You know, their voices, both in the English dub and in the Japanese, and I know them so well. I know their mannerisms, the face expressions that they make, certain quirks that they have. They're so real feeling in the film. So I was really curious to see how the actors were going to, what they were going to do with that, because if they took too much creative liberty, it wouldn't have felt authentic. One of the biggest standouts for me, hands down, was the actress that played Chihiro. Thank God, she's the main character. I will preface this by saying that there were 2 versions of the stage play that were filmed, each one with a different actress playing Chihiro. The one that I saw starred Kana Hashimoto, and she was incredible, honestly. Apparently, this is her theatrical debut, which blew my mind. Her voice was very similar to Chihiro's in the film, her mannerisms, her whiny nature, and then also eventually her character development and character growth. She did add her own spin to it, but never did she stray from the essence of the character. I don't really know how she did it. I was very impressed, but I thought she was a great casting choice for that. I'm just gonna touch on a few other standout performances for me. The actress that played Yubaba, when I was watching it, I was kind of blown away because obviously, first of all, they made her to look very similar to Yubaba, but then also her voice, so similar, kind of unbelievable. And her performance, it was hard to distinguish between the actress and then the Yubaba that we see in the film. After leaving the theater and doing some research, I found out that actually the actress that voiced Yubaba in the original film was the same actress that played her 20 years later in the stage production, which is insane. Her name is Mari Natsuki. She did a phenomenal job. She's 70 years old, apparently, which blows my mind. It was a relatively physically demanding role as well, so she honestly blew it out of the park. I was so impressed by her. The character that played Lin, awesome job. She, I will say, doesn't really look that much in terms of her facial features like Lin from the film, but the voice and the character and the mannerisms and the sarcasm and the humor and the heart that she was able to convey through that role was incredible. So now I wanted to go a little bit more into detail about the differences between the film and the play, right? Obviously, there are some things that don't translate as well to the stage, maybe some creative liberties that the theatrical producers had to take. So there were some, and I do want to go a bit more in depth on them. For the most part, honestly, the play did a very good job of staying true to the source material. I think given just the fantastical nature of the film and the fact that it deals with spirits and gods and a magical world, it's definitely hard to translate to the stage. So yeah, given all of these factors, the stage production honestly did the best job that it could to keep in as many details as possible, both big and small. The script, for the most part, remains very true to the screenplay of the film. The dialogue is similar, if not the exact same at certain points. They pretty much hit on the same story beats and plot points, and I'm sure we're very intentional about not changing too much. That being said, when I checked the runtime of the film, I saw that it was 2 hours and 5 minutes. And then when I checked the runtime of the stage production, it said that it was 2 hours and 50 minutes, 50 as in 50. So that's an extra 45 minutes of screen time, which now that I think back on it, I can't even really tell what that extra time was used for. My theory is that it counts in the time of the intermission, which can be between 15 to 20 minutes. And then the other thing, which I would say is the main difference between the film and the play, which does add a little bit of time, is that there are 3 music/dance numbers in the first act of the play. Hold on. Don't worry, Spirited Away has not been turned into a musical. It's not that kind of vibe at all. These musical numbers are not very long. They last between maybe 1 to 3 minutes. There's only 3 of them. And I do think that they do add a nice element to the stage production specifically. I think adding the music and dance moments serve the play very well. I won't reveal the exact plot points when these musical and dance moments are added in, but I will say that they do serve to develop some more world building, some character depth, and also to really enhance some of those quieter moments that I think Miyazaki is very famous for. Now, what I didn't know, and I found out by reading an interview with the director of the play, is that the lyrics for these music numbers were actually written by Miyazaki over 20 years ago when he was working with Joe Hisaishi on the score for the film. Now, Miyazaki never really meant these lyrics to see the light of day. He mainly just wrote them out and gave them to the composer to convey the vibe and the essence of what the soundtrack should be, which I think Joe Hisaishi did a very great job. It's an incredible score. And like I said, nothing really was supposed to come of the actual lyrics that Miyazaki wrote. However, 20 years later, when John Caird came to Miyazaki and Ghibli with this idea and suggested that he might incorporate some more musical elements to it to really enhance certain points that can't be translated from film to stage as well otherwise, Miyazaki offered these lyrics up to him and said, if you want to, you can use these. I wrote these with essentially the same intention, and it's kind of incredible that this exists, honestly. But it's definitely not a situation where every plot point is followed by a musical and there's a dance number and it's a whole show tune thing. It's not that at all. Who would enjoy the show? I would say honestly the main audience that would like and appreciate this play as much as I did are people who have seen and loved the actual film. While I was watching the play, I was thinking, would I really understand what's going on in certain small points if I didn't see the film? Like, there are a few small moments where magic is involved, or there's a sudden location change, or a character gets transformed from one version of itself into another, that because we've seen the movie, we know what's supposed to happen, but I wouldn't say that they were done in some cases as seamlessly in the play, and definitely not in every situation. There was a lot of cases where they were done very well. However, there were certain instances where I very much relied on my pre-existing knowledge of the story. That being said, going into watching this play, the puppetry and the costumes and the acting is magical regardless of whether or not you've seen the film. It's a beautiful act of theatrical production, so I think you can definitely appreciate the craft of it regardless. However, certain small plot points, you might come out having more questions from the play. So yeah, that was my review of the recording of Spirited Away live on stage. I'm actually really glad that Ghibli films are getting theatrical adaptations. I know My Neighbor Totoro got a theatrical adaptation that premiered in London last year. I love theater. I worked at a theater for a while. It's very much something that fills my soul. I think theater is the perfect amalgamation of so many creative art forms. And I think with the right team and with the right idea and vision, the other Ghibli films can definitely be adapted to stage very effectively. Especially maybe some of the more subtle ones like The Wind Rises, where there isn't as much magic going on, as much otherworldliness. I think movies maybe like Castle in the Sky or Howl's Moving Castle or Nausicaa might be a bit more difficult, but I thought Spirited Away would be incredibly difficult to adapt, which I'm sure it was, but I think they very much did the film justice. So I can't wait to see what they do next. Thank you for watching. Bye.